Welcome to Biology of Marine Mammals. I'm Dr. Leslie Williams, and this lecture covers the trophic roles of pinnipeds. In this lecture, we'll first explore that sometimes pinnipeds are not the top of their food chain or food web, and that there are some predators that actually consume pinnipeds. So we'll take a look at who that might be. Then we'll explore some of the trophic roles and how sometimes competition between species lead to something called ecological niche partitioning. To start, let's actually look at some of the different pinniped predators. Some of these you've actually seen in prior lectures, including the fact that polar bears and orcas, of course, are two major predators on pinnipeds, and sometimes other pinnipeds are even predators on pinnipeds, such as leopard seals or some of the larger male otariids and the walrus. But one set of predators we haven't explored yet are going to be sharks. Now, not all sharks are capable of being pinniped predators. In fact, there's really only two species that are out there that feed on pinnipeds possibly routinely, and those are going to be the great white sharks and the tiger sharks, both notable because they are also implicated in human attacks. Now, not all pinnipeds are going to be subject to shark predation. In order to be subject to shark predation, you really have to coexist in the same habitat as those specific sharks. So tiger sharks, for example, tend to live in more tropical waters. So one major group of pinnipeds that are going to be subject to tiger shark predation are going to be the Hawaiian monk seals, which are actually endangered and found only along certain islands of Hawaii. And interestingly enough, it's thought that the tiger shark predation is actually a significant factor in preventing full recovery of these Hawaiian monk seals. So in the picture that you see here, you can see a Hawaiian monk seal swimming, and you can see a little scar there that is probably from a tiger shark bite that ended up being an unsuccessful attempt to actually eat that Hawaiian monk seal. Now, the Hawaiian monk seals that are targeted tend to live on one particular island, and it's the breeding colony. And interestingly enough, the seals themselves are pretty aware of the tiger sharks that are living around that area or swimming around that area, interested in eating them. And so one of the things the Hawaiian monk seals will do is they'll actually create their own breathing holes in caves. There's quite a few underwater caves off the shores of Hawaii, and they'll swim down and actually release air in these caves that are trapped on the ceiling of the caves, so that if a tiger shark is chasing them, they can escape to one of these caves and breathe for a while, waiting for the tiger shark to go away. That's a pretty nice evasive strategy. For great white sharks will actually prey on a number of pinnipeds in their habitat, but probably a primary favorite food are going to be the northern elephant seals, particularly the smaller elephant seals. So these might be smaller or immature elephant seals, and of course newborn pups that are not particularly adept at swimming yet. So those are going to be some of the major food items of great white sharks. Now, what we're going to do at this point is take a look at the pinnipeds and where they live, so we can get an idea of which pinniped species live with other pinniped species. So if we do a basic overview of the zoogeography of pinnipeds, which is essentially the worldwide distribution, we note that there are 38 existing species, the majority of which are actually phocids. In fact, 90% of all pinnipeds by number are phocids. So phocids, which remember are the true seals, and the walrus live not exclusively, but certainly in a more concentrated aggregation in cold waters. So this is going to be the Arctic Circle and Antarctica. In fact, if you go to those communities, the Arctic community or Antarctica, it's almost exclusively phocids, and in the case of the Arctic, also the walrus. In other words, otariids are either very rare or completely absent. And one possible reason for this is that phocids are just better adapted to cold climates because they have a thicker blubber layer. The otariids, which tend to have a thinner blubber layer, tend to be more concentrated in slightly warmer waters. These are going to be temperate waters like we see off the coast of California, subtropical and possibly even tropical waters. So now that we've actually looked at which species kind of live together, it makes sense that if you look at areas where more than one pinniped species coexist, there's the possibility of competition between these species. So what types of things could they be competing for? Well, the two major resources that you're going to see in interspecific competition, this is competition between species, is going to be competition for the same food source, and in some cases competition for habitable land, particularly including breeding colonies or areas to haul out in. So if you get more than one species living in an area, the idea is that they are going to possibly compete for the same resources, and so this would lead to competition. So let's actually explore the dietary items again and look at how this might play out. So remember, for pinniped diet items, we can break them up into four major groups. We have fish and squid. We have zooplankton, which is usually krill. We have mollusks and crustaceans is another group. And then we, of course, have other pinnipeds and birds, which comprise the warm-blooded prey. So if you get two species that end up competing for the exact same resource, so let's say that you have two species that both feed on krill and fish, for example, the idea is that one will outcompete the other because it is better adapted to securing that resource. In this case, if you're assuming that you're looking at a food item like krill, you would assume that whatever species it has a better body plan for actually eating that krill is going to be better adapted to securing the krill and will therefore outcompete the other species. This is called competition exclusion because in principle it results in the exclusion of the other species. In other words, the other species just cannot compete with that first well-adapted species, and therefore the other species goes locally extinct or needs to do something else. We can actually use an example of this by imagining that there's a candy bar and you have a 2-year-old and an adult human that are both looking at the same candy bar. Well, assuming that all's fair and whoever is going to be better adapted at getting that candy bar actually gets the candy bar, it makes sense that the 2-year-old just isn't going to have the size, the motor skills, maybe the creativeness to steal that candy bar, and the adult's going to win handedly. In other words, you put a candy bar between a 2-year-old and an adult, and the adult's going to win. And so therefore excludes the child from getting the candy bar. Well, what's a child to do? Probably maybe look for another food source would be the first thing that that child would need to do if all the candy was stolen by adults. So that's one of the things that we see with pinnipeds. So if we take a look, for example, at a crab-eater seal and a rock seal, these are going to be two species that actually co-inhabit the same area. They live in Antarctic pack ice, and they do live together. On first glance, you might actually say they have the same diet. They both eat krill, they both eat squid, they both eat fish. So obviously there's some competition, and therefore by this competition exclusion principle, only one species should be surviving. But when you look more carefully at the proportions of each food item that's consumed, you realize that they do indeed partition their resources. The crab-eater seals eat almost exclusively krill, while they only eat a tiny bit of squid and a tiny bit of fish. The rock seal, on the other hand, eats predominantly squid, and only 9% of their diet is comprised of krill. So by basically saying, hey, crab-eater seals, you can have the krill, the raw seals will go ahead and feed mostly on squid and fish, you do end up dividing up the resources that allows both species to coexist together. This idea is called ecological niche partitioning. So this is going to be when two species that are in potential competition with each other end up exploiting or partitioning the resources so that it facilitates coexistence between the two. As a result, the two species will end up playing a different role in the ecosystem. So even though when we looked at the crab-eater seal and the raw seal, upon first glance it looked like they did the same thing, when we looked a little more deeply, we realized no, they really do divide up their food, and it allows them to fill different roles, or what's called niches, and so to do so, it allows them to stay in the same ecosystem together by reducing competition. Interestingly enough, as soon as species start to fill different niches, their body plans often adapt. So I want to use a different example. It's actually a shark example because I've got some great teeth to show you, to look at two different species and how they divide up the resources as well. These shark species are going to be the mako shark and the big-eyed thresher shark, which both live in the pelagic waters or open waters off California. Now, both of them are about the same size. They're both pretty fast swimmers and they both eat fish. But if we take a look at their teeth, we can see they obviously are going to be dividing up their resources in some way. So if we come over here and we look more closely at the thresher shark, this right here is the upper jaw to a thresher shark, you might notice that the teeth are triangular and have small serrations. These are going to be well adapted for tearing flesh. So the thresher shark actually uses its long tail to kind of stun fish and then takes chunks out of them. If we look at a mako shark's teeth, we notice something completely different. So this is the bottom jaw of a mako shark, and what we see here are multiple rows of teeth that are not triangular. They're much more elongated and pointy, and they don't have the serrations on the side. They look a lot more like spears. So from this, we can surmise that the mako sharks are more interested in catching probably fast fish. So these are going to be fish that are swimming away from them, like tuna or mackerel, fish that are fast. And so mako sharks are also very fast, and their goal isn't necessarily to tear chunks out of fish, but just to be able to spear them quickly before they swim away. And so here's an example of two shark species that share the same habitat, play slightly different roles in the ecosystem, and have different adaptations to help facilitate their roles in the ecosystem. And with that, I will see you next time.